Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This audio uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. Today we're diving into something that you might think is pretty familiar, but
Oh, I bet there are some surprises in store.
definitely. We're talking about the presidential cabinet, how it all started way back with George Washington.
Right, because most people, they know the names like Jefferson, Hamilton, but...
Yeah, the big players.
Right, but they don't really think about how this whole institution, this group of advisors to the president...
Right, how they even get there.
Yeah, especially back then, the founders were so suspicious of anything that looked like,
Like the British monarchy.
Exactly, they just fought a whole war to get away from that.
Exactly. So that's what makes this book we're looking at, The Cabinet, George Washington, and the Creation of an American Institution by Lindsay Chervinsky. So interesting.
It really digs into that, yeah.
It really shows how this whole thing, that seems so normal now.
Right, like it was just always there.
Yeah, it was actually a lot of trial and error and figuring things out.
A lot of bumps along the way.
And Washington's own background, his military experience.
Absolutely, that played a huge role.
The book really highlights that, doesn't it?
It does. During the Revolution, think about it. He was constantly relying on these councils of war.
Oh, with his officers.
Yeah, and they would debate, try to reach some kind of consensus before making big decisions.
So are you saying those were like early cabinet meetings, just like a military version?
You could say that, yeah. Think of them as prototypes. It wasn't just about getting different opinions in the room, though.
It was more than that.
It was the whole culture. The way they debated, valued expertise, but also recognized that the president had the final say.
Right. The ultimate authority.
Exactly. And that's the model he brought with him to the presidency. But then he had to, put together the team.
Assembled the dream team.
Right. Which, as the book reveals, turned into a bit of a nightmare.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. So we've got Knox, the war hero, heading up the War Department. Jefferson's at State. Hamilton at Treasury. And Randolph's trying to,
Keep it all together.
Yeah, it's Attorney General. But they each came in with such strong personalities,
And different experiences, different views.
The book tells this story about Knox, how he saw Shays' rebellion firsthand.
Yeah.
And it totally convinced him.
That they needed a strong federal government.
Like, no messing around. This is serious.
Right. And then you've got Jefferson and Hamilton.
Oh, they clashed all the time, didn't they?
They did, even back during the war. Jefferson actually had some British soldiers who were connected to Hamilton imprisoned.
Oh.
Talk about awkward.
Yeah, bringing baggage to the cabinet meeting.
Exactly. So you've got these guys, strong personalities, already disagreeing. And to make things even more interesting...
More complicated.
The Constitution doesn't actually say anything about a cabinet.
Really? So they just left that out?
Yeah, they outline the president's powers, but how he got advice, who he talked to, that was kind of...
left blank.
Yeah, pretty much. And there's a reason for that.
I'm guessing the founders were a little... No.
They were terrified of concentrated power. They just got rid of a king, remember?
They didn't want to recreate that?
Not at all. They actually considered and rejected 3 different types of councils to advise the president during the Constitutional Convention. Each one had problems, raised fears of too much power in one place.
Oh, so like a council of revision where the president and the Supreme Court would review laws together?
Right. Too much power for those 2.
And then there was the idea of a council chosen by the Senate.
Again, concerns about influence, maybe even controlling the president.
And they even considered having a council elected by the people.
Yeah, but that raised worries about undermining the president's authority.
So basically, Washington was walking a tightrope.
Absolutely. Building this new institution, but trying not to look like a king.
Yeah, that's a tough balancing act. And it's interesting how the book points out public opinion really mattered to him.
Oh, yeah. Even small things could blow up.
Like the whole title controversy, where Adams wanted to give Washington some grand title.
Oh, yeah, like His Highness or Protector of Liberties. The public hated it.
Not a good look.
Not at all. Washington never said what he actually wanted, but he was definitely cautious.
Smart politician, right?
Yeah.
Didn't he also try talking to the Senate directly about Native American treaties?
He did. That was a disaster.
What happened?
He went to the Senate chamber, tried to read a statement, but it was so loud.
People couldn't hear.
Barely. And the few who could were too scared to actually say anything.
Talk about an awkward silence.
Yeah, that convinced him that a small group of advisors was the way to go.
Makes sense. So while he was having these early cabinet meetings, figuring things out...
It was a learning process.
Yeah, it wasn't until a major international crisis hit that the cabinet really took center stage.
That's what we'll talk about next time. So last time we were talking about how the cabinet was this, new thing.
Still evolving.
Yeah, and then, boom, the French Revolution happens. Talk about a turning point.
It's easy to forget how big of a deal that was. I mean, for America, too. Those ideas of liberty.
That they just fought for.
Exactly. Now it's playing out on a global scale.
And the French, remember, they were America's allies in the Revolution. Treaties, a sense of obligation.
But also huge risks if they got involved.
Absolutely. That's where the cabinet really becomes, a pressure cooker.
All those personalities, those different experiences we talked about.
They really clash.
Big time.
Okay, so you've got the Federalists like Hamilton and Knox. They're looking at the French Revolution, and they're...
Not impressed.
No, worried, actually. They see chaos, a threat to stability, not just in Europe, but...
Can spread here.
Right. Plus, Hamilton, he's built this whole economic system. Trade is crucial.
War would mess that up.
For sure. And then there's Britain, their main trading partner. Getting involved could provoke them.
So much to consider. Then on the other side, you've got Jefferson and Randolph.
The Republicans.
Right. And they're much more
idealistic
about the French Revolution. They see it as, an extension of America's own fight.
For freedom.
They felt like they had to help.
A moral obligation. And let's not forget, they still didn't really trust Britain.
Leftover baggage from the Revolution.
Right. So you've got this huge division within the cabinet, and Washington's in the middle.
Trying to figure out what it even means to be neutral.
Exactly. Chervinsky tells this great story about Citizen Genet, the French ambassador. He
caused some problems.
To say the least. He shows up in Charleston like a rock star.
Everyone's excited.
Yeah, and then he immediately starts commissioning American privateers to attack British ships.
Wait, without even asking Washington?
Yeah, pretty much trying to drag America into the war.
That's bold.
It was a direct challenge to Washington's authority, and it put American neutrality to the test. The cabinet had to figure out how to respond.
What did they come up with?
They agreed Genet was out of line, but how to handle him, that's where the debate started. Hamilton wanted to show force.
Maybe even use the military.
He wasn't messing around, maintain order,
Right, his style. What about Jefferson and Randolph?
They pushed for diplomacy, didn't want to provoke France, but still...
Had to stand up for themselves.
Exactly. So Washington, after a lot of back and forth, he kind of splits the difference.
Finds a middle ground.
He issues the Neutrality Proclamation declaring America would not take sides.
Huge moment. That sets the precedent for American neutrality for,
decades.
And it also shows how the cabinet's role was expanding. It's not just advice anymore.
They're helping Washington define what it means to be president.
And exercise that power on a global stage.
For sure. But then, back home, you have the Whiskey Rebellion.
That's the one where they put a tax on whiskey.
People freaked out. Western Pennsylvania... farmers, they felt targeted, saw it as...
the government overreaching.
Exactly. And it showed how fragile this new nation still was.
So the cabinet, they've got another challenge.
How do you deal with dissent? How do you maintain order, federal authority?
And I'm guessing different opinions on how to handle it.
Oh, absolutely. Hamilton, he wanted a strong military response, crush the rebellion, send a message.
Makes sense, knowing his personality.
Right. Plus, he had seen firsthand how weak the government was under the Articles of Confederation during Shays' Rebellion. Didn't want to go back to that.
So what about the others?
Jefferson, Randolph, they urged caution, tried to avoid violence, deal with the underlying causes.
Interesting how their past experiences shape their views.
Right. So Washington, in this case, he listens to the cautious voices, sends peace commissioners.
To negotiate.
Yeah, but when that fails...
he had to take action.
He leads the troops himself.
The first president to do that?
The only one, actually. And that shows you how the cabinet was shaping the presidency. The Constitution said the president could call up the militia, but...
the cabinet helped him figure out how to use that power.
Exactly, setting a precedent for the executive branch enforcing federal law.
Huge implications. Then things get even more complicated with the Jay Treaty.
Oh, yeah, that was controversial. Didn't it almost tear the cabinet apart?
Pretty much. The treaty was negotiated with Britain to settle issues from the Revolution.
Sounds good. So what's the problem?
A lot of people saw it as a sellout. It included concessions to Britain that...
seemed like a betrayal.
Right. And it didn't help that the negotiations were...
top secret.
Yeah. Jay sent the treaty back without even telling the American minister in France.
Not a good look.
No, it just fueled suspicion. So the cabinet, they had to advise Washington, should he even submit it to the Senate?
For ratification. So they're not just talking about policy anymore, it's...
high-stakes politics. And public opinion was intense. People were protesting.
Newspapers were attacking the treaty. It was a mess, and the cabinet was right in the middle of it.
And this is where Chervinsky argues you start to see the dark side of the cabinet.
The personal rivalries, the potential for betrayal.
That whole Randolph affair, right?
Yeah, Edmund Randolph, the Secretary of State.
Accused of treason.
Yeah, based on some intercepted French dispatches, he ends up resigning, his reputation ruined.
Wow. It shows just how much pressure these guys were under.
And how this whole system could, backfire.
So Washington still has to make a decision about the treaty.
He agonized over it. He knew it would make people mad, even some in his own cabinet.
But he had to weigh that against avoiding war with Britain, securing those trade concessions.
Tough call. It really defined his presidency.
And in the end, he signed it.
He did. He thought it was the best thing for the country, even if it meant taking a political hit.
So the treaty's ratified, Randolph's gone, and Washington's dealing with all the consequences. How did that affect his view of the cabinet going forward?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll explore when we come back.
Welcome back. So last time, we were talking about how the Jay Treaty, it really shook things up.
It definitely strained relationships within the cabinet, even between Washington and some of his advisors.
Right. The book really argues that all of that turmoil, it really changed how Washington approached the cabinet in his second term.
He did things a bit differently.
It mentions he started relying more on those individual meetings, with each secretary.
Fine one-on-one.
Yeah, instead of those big cabinet meetings with everyone together. It seems like maybe he was just, I don't know.
Maybe a little disillusioned with the whole group dynamic.
Yeah, maybe he'd seen how, personalities could clash and those political rivalries.
Even with brilliant people like Hamilton and Jefferson, it could just derail everything.
It's like herding cats sometimes.
Right. Maybe those one-on-one meetings just felt more, I don't know.
Manageable.
Yeah. Plus, but then each department was more established, more organized.
So he could just go straight to the expert on a particular issue.
Maybe he felt more confident doing that. Plus, he was tired. The constant attacks, the partisanship.
He wanted to stay above it all, but it takes a toll.
For sure. And then you have that whole showdown with the House of Representatives.
Oh, when he demanded to see all the executive branch papers about the Jay Treaty?
Yeah, they wanted all the details of the negotiations. That was an early test of what we now call executive privilege.
That the president can keep some information secret, even from Congress?
Exactly. It's a balance of power thing, and it's still debated today. So what did the cabinet advise Washington to do?
In that situation, yeah.
They argued that he did have the power to withhold information if it was,
in the national interest.
Right. They used examples from their own experiences. Like Randolph, when he was governor of Virginia.
He was frustrated by how weak the executive power was back then.
Exactly. So Washington refused to give Congress the papers, set a precedent for future presidents.
But also, it sparked this debate, like you said, about how much power each branch of government should have.
A debate that continues to this day.
It's interesting how the book makes this point. The cabinet wasn't just about giving the president advice. It was about,
defining the presidency itself.
Yeah. What do you mean by that?
Well, the Constitution, it lays out the basics, but it's pretty vague on a lot of the detail.
How things actually work in practice.
Right. It was Washington, working with his cabinet, who really figured out a lot of the practical stuff.
Like how to handle foreign policy, how to enforce laws.
How to assert that presidential authority.
All these precedents they set, they've shaped how the presidency works for, centuries.
They really have. So it's not just about who was in that first cabinet, but the institution itself.
And its role in shaping American government.
Exactly.
Fascinating. So what happened after Washington? Did the next presidents, did they just follow the same model?
Both Adams and Jefferson, they basically stuck with it, the cabinet idea. But of course,
they had their own spin on it.
Of course. Adams, he inherited Washington's cabinet, but a lot of those guys were really loyal to Hamilton.
So that must have been tough.
He had to learn how to assert his own authority. Jefferson, he chose his own team, people who agreed with him.
More aligned with his vision?
Right. But even then, he still had to deal with personalities, different agendas.
So even with a model in place, being president, it's about managing people.
It's a people business.
It really is. And I think that's one of the big takeaways from the book, The Cabinet.
Yeah.
Even those parts of government that we take for granted, they have this,
a story behind them.
Yeah, these fascinating histories, and they still shape how things work today.
If you're interested in learning more about this, it's definitely worth checking out The Cabinet by Lindsay Chervinsky. She does a great job of, making it come alive.
It's a really engaging read. It makes you think about, the challenges those early leaders faced and how they figured things out.
And she leaves us with some thought-provoking questions. Was the Cabinet ultimately a success?
Yeah, did it live up to the founders' hopes? What are its strengths and weaknesses?
Big questions to ponder.
They really are. And for all of our listeners out there, if you'd like to delve deeper into this topic, I highly recommend checking out the book. We've provided a link for you in the show notes.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic.